Okay, everyone, this mic is on. We're playing the fun game of how many things can I fit onto this music stand? Because I remembered last week that we have people on Zoom that also want to be part of the conversation. So friends on Zoom, I'm now paying attention. I'm going to tell everyone that even if you're not comfortable with the mic, we're using it so that people on Zoom can hear us, and then they can participate in the conversation. And if someone on Zoom has a question or wants to jump in, we're going to try to stay on top of it, and we'll be able to bring you onto the screens, and you can jump in and ask or comment or all of that. Just throw it in the chat, and we'll try to stay on top of it. Okay, so now that my station is set, welcome to part 2 of Summer Sunday School for All. Hi, friends. Come on in, grab a seat. We're doing something a little bit different. If you missed us last week, we are now in week 2 of a 3-week series on the Epistle of James. Hi. Oh, yes, come on in, squeeze in. And if you have a question, hold on to it, because we'll be able to include you in this. Hey, now. So I am going to, last week, we talked about a few different things, actually. I had a couple of questions that I flagged from last week that I wanted to come back and return to. But generally speaking, the theme last week was about works and faith and looking at kind of how James presents things a little bit differently than maybe what we're more familiar with from Paul's letters. Not necessarily in conflict, but maybe as constructive counterweights. 2 things that I wanted to touch on before we get into this week's text, though. One is that we talked a little bit about the law of liberty. This was a phrase that showed up a couple times in James's letter, and it's not really something it's not a term that I was familiar with, but we talked a little bit about the difference between liberty that's all about me and liberty that's more about us. Liberty is certainly a cousin of the word freedom, which has a lot of different meanings in our country and our context. But I happened across this short interview in the New York Times a few days ago with this guy, Pepe Mujica, who was the president of Uruguay for a while, no longer. He's about 89 now. But he had this line where he was talking about freedom, and he said, "You're free when you escape the law of necessity, when you spend the time of your life on what you desire. If your needs multiply, you spend your life covering those needs." I was thinking about the law of liberty compared to the law of necessity, and what a difference and shift in world outlook it can be when, and I recognize that in life this is often a function of our privilege and our social context and what we have access to, but when you can live with a mindset of liberty, it's more about what you can create in the world and how you can put yourself out there creating situations. Necessity is so much about responding to situations. And so certainly not to gloss over that sometimes you are in a position of scarcity and you have to respond to these things. In the context of the early church, where they were not in power of their social context at all, to push people to live in a liberty kind of mindset feels much more radical than it did to me when I first looked at the text. The other note, and these are just things to hold in our head as we get into this next bit of reading. The other thing, this is a rhetorical question, but Evangeline had this comment right at the end of our discussion last week about faithing as a verb. And as I left church last week, I was thinking, what's the difference between faithing and believing? What's the difference between faith and belief? I know this is a bit semantics, but what occurs to me is that, at least in my ears, my contemporary ears, belief feels static. It feels very fixed. And faith feels much more like a process, a way, a path. So I want to offer those kind of, again, some semantic distinctions as we get into this next bit of reading. Now, again, for folks who missed last week, I'm going to pass this mic around, and we're going to take turns reading. I have it split up into 2 readings. So we're going to start with James 3, if you want to grab a Bible from in front of you. It's going to be chapters 13, or verses 13 through 18 we're going to start with. Or sorry, chapter 3, verses 3 through 12. That's the first one. That's the second part. So chapter 3 in James, verses 3 through 12. If you feel called to read, throw your hand up in a minute, and I'm going to come to you with a mic. But before we do, let's all say together, if we can, the prayer of I always forget how we print it in. Preparation, the prayer of preparation. If we can all say that together. Let the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So who wants to read? Any takers? Got a hand up from Carmita. Awesome. 3 to 12, yeah. And then we'll stop, we'll talk for a second, and then we'll move on to the second part of the reading.
Right. If we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships, though they are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them, yet they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature, can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species. But no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this ought not to be so. Does the spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and brackish water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, yield olives, or a grapevine figs? No more can salt water yield fresh.
All right, thank you, Carmita. So last week is all about works, and this week is about speech. Now, before we move into the other parts of these readings, I kind of want to ask on this front end, why do you think James is so critical of speech? When he calls the tongue a fire, what kind of speech is he thinking of? And just for a little historical context, if this was written by James, brother of Jesus, Bishop of Jerusalem, it would have been written before 62, which is when he was martyred, and likely, scholars say, before the first martyrdom of Stephen, which was in the year 36. So this is a time where the notion of speech is very alive, both in terms of outward facing and internally in the church. Why do you think he's so critical? What sorts of things, I wonder, was he seeing or hearing about? And as a follow-up question, is speech different from works? Is it the same? Is there a Venn diagram? How do we think about the difference between speech and works? Particularly in a religion where evangelizing is a big part of what our texts tell us to do. Yeah, I'll come to you. Hold on one second. Well, let me give you this mic, just for our Zoom friends. Thank you.
It's a bit of a wilding he's describing. That is, it's a contagion.
Contagion.
Somewhat, when one hears, crucify, crucify him, that is something that ramifies almost instinctively out of the mouths of all of us, really. So that when you go to a political rally, I won't repeat any of the slogans, but when you hear a slogan, regardless of whose party you're part of, that slogan is a wave. It's something that in a sense you don't speak. You are carried on the wave of speech. And that wave is something that you may not even agree with.
Yeah, yes. The the way that speech can move through a community, either a live community in the moment or sort of culturally. I mean, I know that brings up a lot of things for me, and I agree that it's probably a good rule for all of us to not bring in the names of outside, we're thinking a lot about them politicians, but I do think this is very live and very important to where we are now and where we expect to be over the next few months. What does that bring up for folks? Hi, welcome. Yeah.
It's preceded by saying that not many should be teachers. So I'm thinking that perhaps in that time, there were a lot of people saying a lot of stuff about Jesus and what they thought and what they didn't think that may or may have not been right. So he was just saying, watch your mouth.
Evergreen advice. What else? I'm curious. Oh yeah, let me bring this over to you.
Well, to me, especially in light of our atmosphere in America today, speech can be so personal and can be taken in so many different ways by the person who hears it, can be interpreted differently, whereas works, good or bad, is more solid. Their works does not present itself to be open to as many interpretation as speech does.
Yes, interpretation and communication, the two sides of that, and the idea that I like this notion of works being up to interpretation. That's really interesting. What else? I'm curious if anyone's had the experience of being caught up in what you were describing earlier. You know, there's this thing about tongue as a fire, being caught up in a wave. I wonder if any of us here have had that experience, maybe at a rally, maybe just worked up about an issue and you maybe realize all of a sudden you're saying something that maybe the imperfectness of what you're saying is starting to come to light, or you're realizing, ooh, that kind of speech is harming someone I didn't mean to harm. Have any of y'all been there? I know I have, many times. You kind of realize, oh, I need to stop saying that way. To imagine getting caught up in that in the immediate years after Jesus' life is, that's something to think about. I want to move us on into the next set of readings real quick. Oh, wait, I'm checking Zoom. Okay, I did not miss anyone. We got another set of readings. It kind of follows through. Like I said last week, for those of us that weren't here, this letter reads kind of like a wisdom text. There are themes that are kind of braided together, but if you read it from top to bottom, it feels like he's jumping around a lot. So that's why these readings are kind of pulling from a couple of different spots. But is anyone feeling called to pick up where Carmita left off? Chapter 3, verses 13 to 18, and then there's a bit of a jump into 4. These can be two readers. Here, I'll bring this to you. Thank you.
Who is wise and understanding among you? Show by your good life that your works are done with gentleness born of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not be boastful and false to the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, devilish. For where there is envy and selfish ambition, there will also be disorder and wickedness of every kind. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace for those who make peace.
Thank you. So does someone want to grab that last little bit, chapter 4, I think it's 11 through 12. Here you go. Thank you.
Do not speak evil against one another, brothers and sisters. Whoever speaks evil against another or judges another speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you're not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver and judge who is able to save and to destroy. So who then are you to judge your neighbor?
Thank you. Now, the first question that came to me, well, I guess before we get to the question, one little tidbit, a linguistic tidbit. Twice in that first section, James refers to envy and selfish ambition, and that they produce disorder and wickedness. I wanted to share that the Greek that's translated there as envy in other letters and in other spots is also translated as zeal, which is, I think that's an interesting, envy and zeal. I can see them being related, but there's a color to that is worth reflecting on. A bitter zeal. You know, usually we hear about people being zealous about things they're excited about, but being zealously bitter, what's that? And then the second thing, and this is less different, more similar, but selfish ambition is also translated elsewhere as self-interest. Right? So it's not just ambition, but focus. So my question is, if James says that envy and selfish ambition produce disorder and wickedness, does this ring true for y'all, for us, today? I mean, where do we see this in play today? Is this, say that again? Fox News. All media, yeah. Mm-hmm. We live in a world with a whole lot of speech. What do we think about, he sort of constructs in that first section, 13 to 18, he sort of constructs these two equations, right? Bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts leads to wickedness and disorder. And then what's the opposite formula he's presenting there? Peace. Yes, peace. And what does peace produce? He says a harvest of righteousness. That last line, that verse 18, a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace for those who make peace. Now, the word righteousness there seemed notable to me. It's tricky. It's something that I often think of as combative. Righteousness, that is something you fight for. That is a justice that is won. But for righteousness to come out of peace, how is that different? Or rather, we know how it's different up here in our heads and our hearts, but how's it different in our lives? I mean, calm? Calm, yeah.
If you think of righteousness as right living.
Righteousness as right living.
So right relationship with people, right relationship with God, then you can better work for peace, I think. First comes the right living.
Right living leading to peace. Then you can work for peace. Maybe that is how we work for peace.
I was saying that if you think of righteousness as right living, like right relationship with God, right relationship with each other, if we're thinking about doing the right thing, then we can start thinking about, okay, let's find some peace in common.
I guess for me, this goes back to the question you asked about, have we ever in our lives you were in a position where it was I was in a job where I realized I was getting caught up in the local gossip, everyone talking about this person or that person. I actually decided it changed my life when it dawned on me that I was falling into it to quit and become a freelancer, because I didn't want that to be and that makes me think of what she just said, that if it's right living, if you're trying to do the right thing, then you can have some peace in your heart and it's not that you don't make mistakes and get caught up and badmouth someone, but it's about recognizing, I think, the problems that come from getting caught up in a group, which to me is so contemporary with what's happening in this country, in the world.
Getting caught up with a group, yes, absolutely.
I take exception to that last line, depending on how you define righteousness. Because there's so many people who are holy and righteous in their mind, but they're very rigid in their righteousness. And they use it against people. It doesn't make peace to me, so I take exception to it.
But is that a distinction between self-righteous and righteous?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I'm wondering if that's the objection you're having is really about a different term, self-righteous versus righteous. One is an, okay.
A lot of people use their opinions and the opinions that they try to put onto others as being righteous, holy, not self-righteous. They don't see it as coming from themselves and what they are putting forth to other people. They see it's coming from God and they're interpreting it correctly.
I still interpret that as self-righteous. That's their interpretation, their opinion. Yeah.
One thing that I would offer just into there, and then I'm going to come to you, Aaron, is I think this is probably true of all religions, but certainly it's true in ours, that one of the big pitfalls that we get into is when we elevate our own interpretation so high. It's a way in which we give ourselves permission to be self-righteous with having the illusion that we're being righteous about something else that's outside of us. But our interpretation that's part of ourself. And being able to distinguish your interpretation from what God is on the other side of your interpretation, I think is a really complicated leap, but an important one for exactly that reason. Because if you are behaving self-righteously, but you don't think it's about you, but somehow functionally you're making it all about you, that's a problem. And Lord knows we've done it.
When I heard harvest of righteousness, I actually didn't see it in the context of being internal. I saw it as external, because we were just talking about how this is about, again, within the context of people speaking out about the word or the life of Jesus in a way to everyone else. So when I heard harvest of righteousness, I thought of a field going out and feeding a village. And I think what he's saying is, if it comes from a place that isn't bitter or ambitious, you get to share that harvest outward. So I've read it as an external thing, not an internal thing.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That actually feels like it really connects to some of what we were saying last week about liberty. Liberty for me, or liberty for us? Righteousness for me, or righteousness for others? Where is the focus? Yeah. I want to take us to one last question before we move on. I failed to set a timer, so I assume we've been talking just the exact right amount of time, or maybe 5 minutes short of the exact right length of time. But this last question, and this is not to be too insidery about it, but a few weeks ago we spent 2 weeks in a row talking about the role of judges in the history of Israel, and kind of how this role evolved and all these different shapes it took. From the judges in the book of Judges, these kind of local leaders that are raised up, to Israel choosing a king, to the evolving role of prophets. With all of that in mind, I'm seeing this last little section from James where he talks about judges and judging. He talks about having one lawgiver and judge. My question is, in terms of how the church behaves in the world, what is the effect of having one lawgiver and one judge that is not a member of our church or an elected official or anything? What is going on there with basically saying, not only don't judge your neighbor, but like none of us get to be the judge at all? What does that mean for us? Does that take away in any way our ability to discern right and wrong? What is the place of discerning right and wrong if we are not to be judges? What's going on here? How do we function as a church? How do we decide these things? Do we need to decide these things? Yeah, Krista, pardon my reach.
It felt to me in reading it very linked to this concept in verse 13, show by your good life that your works are done with gentleness born of wisdom. I remember as a kid, a teenager asking my mom, I don't understand this thing that my evangelical friends are talking about, going out and, convincing people kind of thing.
Yeah.
And she said, you need to live the life and that will be your mission. Like that, just show by just your life and people will come to you and say, that looks wonderful and peaceful and happy and fulfilling. How do I get me some of that? And it sort of feels to me like then as church people, we can, using righteousness in the pure form of the word, live in righteousness, in peace, in love, in compassion, in all of those things that we hopefully at this church uphold those values, and that through those quote unquote works of just living that life that can speak for us in some ways. Is that part of it maybe?
Yeah. Thank you. Coming your way.
All very interesting distinctions for me, but when Christ walks through the money lenders, he doesn't say to himself, well, I don't know, this is a bit problematic. Right? No, he issues a judgment. That's a judgment. In other words, and on November 5th, we're not asked to stay at home and say Om Namah Shivaya. We're asked to judge between two candidates. And we need to bring all of our values, whether they're Christian or Buddhist or all of our beliefs and faiths, and judge and commit. So I think all those things can be true, but I think part of it is every moment shouldn't be filled with judgment, but we should reserve our judgment for times of choosing.
That gets at something that I think is a sort of perennial tension for me, reading these religious and ultimately political texts written in a time where they couldn't vote. So when we first of all, I think it's important that we make a distinction between how the church behaves and how the nation behaves. These are two different kind of spheres. They are connected. I'm the first person to say every verse in this Bible is political, but not in the way that I think or you think or we think all the time. Because ultimately, politics is about how we treat each other. And that's most of what's in there. However, I personally, and I don't have an answer for this is maybe just a rhetorical question we can all chew on between now and next Sunday, but some of this stuff about leaving things in God's hands, which is, that's not a quote from James, but that's kind of in here, this we're not supposed to judge, but we are in a participatory democracy, so we do have to evaluate, and we are asked and obligated to participate in this great project of group consensus and what comes next and what's the best path forward. So how do you do that without doing the things that James warns us against? How do you evaluate and make these decisions without judging your neighbor? How do you speak truth to power without being self-righteous? You know?
Well, I think that's it. If you judge from a self-righteousness, it's don't judge because you're right. Don't judge because you know everything. It's judging from what you learn from your everyday life, making an assessment and continuing to learn. But I think there's a difference between being self-righteous and judging. So I don't think it's about not judging, but where that comes from.
Coming to you, Van. Oh, yeah, my pleasure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When is opinion judging? Or the difference between opinion and judgment? I don't know the answer.
I'm going to pitch that to the floor. I'm going to wind it in two.
I think that's a fair point because there are two different aspects to a judge. A judge isn't just a person who decides guilt, it's also the person who declares sentencing. So maybe that's the thing that we should be looking at is not the deciding the guilt part, but the declaring a sentencing against someone.
I'm going to do Janice and then come to you.
I guess I would have to disagree that voting is judging. I don't think they're the same. It's more what you were saying, that it's your opinion of this person that you're voting for more closely adheres to what's in your heart and your mind. But I don't necessarily think it's judging and saying the person you didn't vote for is wrong or bad. I guess that's just a distinction for me.
Yeah, I mean, most of what we're doing is parsing words here, so I don't think you're out of place. Yeah, but words matter, right?
Judging should be impartial. One makes a judgment based on a certain set of rules or knowledge that comes down from wherever, the law or what have you. Opinion is more personal, and it may be based on good judgment or poor judgment.
And then there's opinion of what's good and what's poor.
The opinion of the opinion. I think this is a great place for us to end up. These are not questions with fixed answers. I think that it's safe to say that our language of speech and judgment is in many ways very, very different from James's, but it's not unrelated. And I think these are things that we got to chew on over the next few months and indeed the rest of our lives. How do we make decisions, difficult decisions as a people, while also sowing a harvest of peace? I don't know, but I think we'll get there. If you'll join me in just I want to sum up with a quick prayer this week. And last week I kind of just wandered off and then the conversation was over. That was weird, sorry.
We're not judging.
Thank you, but we are forming opinions. No. All right, if you'll join me in prayer, the Lord be with you. God, there is so little that we can be certain of. There's so little that we know. And we know that you love that about us. That's indeed one of the things we can be certain of. We thank you for walking with us in these questions, in this time of wandering and wondering. We know from story after story of the wilderness that that is one of, if not the main place where you live, in that place of not knowing. Give us strength and clarity of mind to do our best, weighing the decisions ahead of us, to do so in peace and in service of your righteousness, not ours.